Hi, this is Bingham Boy John Saltas. I'm Exo Studio from my fellow Bingham Boy Ron Yengich and our program specialty expert, everything audio, Bill Frost. I'm not in studio again this week, thanks to being out of a kindness to Bill and Ron, and extra cautious because I had COVID recently and I don't want to spread the germs. Ron, you're there.
Yeah, thank you, John, and you're looking better. I mean, you are looking better. I can see John on the interwebs.
So what you're saying is you're agreeing with me that you see the George Clooney now, not the George Chavallo?
That's what I'm exactly saying. In fact,
Yeah,
I think
so.
I told you that yesterday. But yeah, you look much better and you look healthier. And next time you'll be here. Hopefully, I will.
Yeah, I think I'll start returning soon enough. I feel good. I've been bike riding and stuff. I just came out of the blue, whatever. But hey, before we get too far into it, you know me, Ron. I wear failures on my sleeve a little bit. And last week in that COVID cloud, I really couldn't think well. Not that it would have made me smarter, but I was misstating a couple times. I misspoke and said January 6th occurred in 2020. It was actually 2021. But I also really dropped the ball when I referenced the Dunning-Kruger effect and called it the Doppler effect. I have no idea where that came from. I think it was just something that spun out of the web of my disease in the head. But and then what it then effaced was that maybe I'm a culprit of being a Dunning-Kruger kind of person myself, because I was overstating what I actually knew about. So, my apologies to the people who are smart out there and knew that I was an idiot. And to those who are not as smart to know, then just go along with it. You can call it Doppler, Dunning-Kruger, or whatever. You know what it is, though, Ron, don't you? I mean,
yeah, you explained it to us last week. I mean,
I tried. I think I tried, and then next thing I knew, I was getting a phone call from Mark Eubank because I was talking about the weather instead of something scientific. But it's the meme of it is basically why do dumb people think they're so smart? And so that the problem with that is if you have it, you don't know you have it, and you can't confuse it with just making a simple misstatement. We all do that, but in the era of Trump, nobody even talked about, some obscure thought process before Trump came along. And then everybody kind of tried to put a identifier to it, and it came up with the Dunning-Kruger. He's enlightened a lot of people regarding that because there are comments about it all the time. And it boils down to where people like Trump have a bias. They're the people who know the least are the most confident, and they lack the self-awareness to recognize that. That's why he says stuff like, I'm the only one who can solve this war. I'm the only one who can prevent COVID. I'm the only one who can do X, Y, Z. That's, he can talk about things that he has no knowledge about, weather systems or whatever. He just is beyond his capabilities. He's really, again, he's just over his head. So.
Yeah, but the point of it is that we all make mistakes on our recollection about things. I think I've said this to you, and we won't stay on this very long. I think older people feel worse about it when you call somebody by the wrong name or even in normal conversation, because we're told all the time that that's an indication that we have dementia. I mean, my grandkids, I mentioned this, I think, on the program before, are always calling me on stuff. And mistakes I might make about particularly things that are in the names of people that I get wrong. But in point of fact, we all do it, and it happens all the time, and you saved it. But that's one of the things about this podcast. We really don't edit it much at all, only to get dead time out. Bill is really good at that, and we're not perfect. We don't claim to be perfect. We have our opinions. You're welcome to send us responses where you think that we're wrong. We welcome that, and we'll discuss it. But I think that was something that you did correct at the time, and I think everybody's cool with it.
Well, I just wear it, because, it can be harmful, the spreading of misinformation, and particularly when from an authoritative voice. And it's not new to Trump, actually. So it's not a cognitive decline in this case. He's been doing it for a long time, overstating everything from his knowledge of casinos to chocolate to schools to you name it. But it's dangerous because in the late 1980s, I think that's when it was, he took a full-page ad out in the New York Times, calling for the death penalty to five black men for some murder in Central Park. And when you do it from an authoritative point of view with, the strength of a name or and this virtue behind it, people believe it. These guys must be guilty. And there's the danger of it. Well, Ron, you're a criminal defense attorney. You know these guys were ultimately proven innocent.
They were proven innocent. And the thing about it is that psychological syndrome that you talk about has been discussed quite a bit. But with Trump, it's also just plain on narcissism. His ego says that he is going to do things that a normal human being would know that they can't do. He was going to have the Ukraine war settled the day after he got into office. You know, the price of everything was going to go down within a week. All of these things that any reasonable person would say aren't going to happen. But that is more narcissism and ego and the hucksterism that comes with him wherever he is. That is a part of it. And it may play into that syndrome. But this is simply just an egomaniac. And we can talk about that. We can talk about that in relationship to.
No, let's go past it. You know, the only ellipse on this I would put is that compare it to what he says. Compare it to Jake Tapper, which we had already brought up before. But now Jake has become kind of not apologetic, but he's having to answer to some of it. And he said, I think today, maybe it was yesterday, that, well, the difference is that Biden was in cognitive decline and Trump is not. Well, you know, who made Jake Tapper, a psychologist, or,
he did
a prognosis like that? Nobody did. He did. So so the tendency in this case is to let him off the hook, to be a narcissist, to overstate. Oh, that's just Trump. That's just the way he is. He's just making jokes, and we get it, but people who aren't MAGA don't get it, and he's owning the libs. It's not a joke. Dangerous.
But I do want to follow up, and we weren't going to go here this long, but we'll go. I think MAGA people, in a way, do get it a lot of the time, and it goes directly to his parade. It was going to be the biggest parade, military parade in American history, and a relatively few number of people showed up relative to what he planned for it to be. And a lot of the people that showed up were expecting much more than he offered. And I think that the numbers do indicate something. He's big on numbers. Everything is about how big his is and how small everybody else's is. And the pun is intended here. Okay, because that's who he is. Well, in this instance, now that he was proven wrong again on crowd size and stuff like that, then they just move on. But I believe that a lot of people are going, wait a minute. He didn't deliver on what he said he was going to do. And that's happened over and over again. And sometimes the best thing that you can do with a fool is to let a fool show that he's a fool. And so, relative to Donald Trump on this stuff, it is indeed true that Donald Trump wouldn't know the difference between a lie and a cat if it scratched him. And that's just who he is. Hopefully, out of his own mouth, people will begin to recognize it more. And I think that is the truth, and I think it can happen. And I hope it's happening now.
I agree with you. He took it out on Hegseth now. He's blaming Hegseth for planning a poor parade. I mean, the guy, just fess up. You're the president, man. Own something once. Hey, Ron, the parade was what it was. It wasn't the communist style parade. It didn't turn into that like the left kind of thought it might turn into. It also was a fiasco in terms of I just keep on seeing that squeaky tank. I've looked for other things. I can't find the Abrams or anything. So, but you've been around through the era of our modern protests. Give us some insights to what your thoughts are regarding why it's important to protest, because there were counter protests as well.
Well, I spent a good part of my legal career doing pro bono work on various type of protests, starting actually as a lawyer with when the Iranian students protested Jimmy Carter coming to Salt Lake City. It was at the time when they were trying to depose the Shah, and I represented those kids. A bunch of them got arrested up at Temple Square. And then after that, did protest case for nuclear testing down in Nevada, went to Nevada and represented a couple of people down there. Did the Hercules 4 case, which is one of the cases I'm most proud of it having done, where we got an acquittal based upon a choice of evils doctrine, which hasn't happened a lot. And that's not to pat myself on the back, but to our clients that did all the right things. And then a lot of other protests during the Iraq War and some of that stuff. Protests are important if they're peaceful, because if they're peaceful, they show that people are making an effort to talk to their government because their government's not listening to them. And now that we have the internet, there are a lot of effective protests, in a sense, that are culminated from things that occur on the internet. But to put your body out there is a great thing to do. Sadly, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about this because you were at the protest the other day, the No Kings protest. But the fact is that you take the time to show up. That means something to people. And if people that respect you see there or know that you went, then that gives them something to think about, even if they themselves don't do it. It also, like it or not, to the people that are demean protesters, it has an impact on them. And it can have a positive impact on them. Or if you break the idea of making it a peaceful protest by burning or destroying stuff, then you can have a positive impact in their own mind. See who they are. We told you who they are. They're exactly who they say. But it's the showing up that counts. And that's why protests have always been important in our history.
Right. It is historical. Some people think protesting just started yesterday and it's just these bad guys that don't like Trump or something. They're all violent, of course, and that's really not true. But, the first protests here were the original Tea Party, going back at least that. Protesting against unfair taxes and so on. But there have been more. Abolitionists protested, women's suffrage, the labor movement, civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter. You go on and on. Stonewall. These are methods throughout our history in which the better part of public society could actually foment change on a government or style that was unpopular, but that was their only recourse. You know this, and I know this from the Vietnam era. How aggressive some of those peace sit-ins were. They started out as peaceful, and somebody come bonking them on the heads, and all of a sudden it turns violent, and people say, "Oh my God, they're violent protesters." Really, they were just sitting around smoking pot and blowing flowers, and bubbles and shit, and then they got bonked. And then all of a sudden there's a problem. And that's almost like LA a little bit. LA, began as peaceful. It turned into some level of non-peaceful. Autos were burned and rocks were thrown and all that stuff. But the city wasn't being destroyed. And yet that's the imagery that was presented day in and day out ad nauseum on the right-wing networks.
But
wrong.
But that's kind of what our own governor and other governors and city and mayors and Donald Trump himself in sending the military into those protests. They did it to aggravate people. It wasn't necessary at the time. When we go back, probably the greatest protest in modern history is Mahatma Gandhi, when he went and took salt out of the salt area in India, because that was a taxable thing that the British Empire taxed, and walked across much of India to protest with other people about the treatment of the Indian people. And it led to, really, ultimately, the overthrow of the English system of holding colonial lands everywhere. That was the start of it. It was this skinny little, and I'm proud to say, former defense attorney, Mahatma Gandhi, who just peacefully did that and did it in a way that brought the British Empire to its knees. Winston Churchill called him let me try to bring it up. I can't do it, but he referenced his having been a lawyer and demeaned the fact that he was a lawyer in doing this. He brought the British Royal Navy and everyone else to its knees because they couldn't deal with it. These were people that truly were peaceful. And Martin Luther King, among others, used him as an example in the protests during the 60s about segregation. And so it's important, and sometimes people that protest in that way do get hurt. Some of them become martyrs, and we've got to honor that attitude. And I would always tell people that I was going to represent in protest. I quite often would tell them what they should or should not do, and say, if you want to ruin your message, start trashing places, because you're going to kill your message.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of I never did want to participate in a violent protest. I don't believe in it. I believe in marching and being loud and swearing if you need to. I don't mean that lightly. That's part of a freedom of speech. But I don't think throwing objects or blowing smoke or matches and all that kind of stuff does anybody any good. There's, because at some point the public opinion weighs against you. But knowing that, both sides in this past weekend were saying, oh, there's going to be, infiltrators that are going to disrupt the No Kings March. And the left was saying it, the right was saying it. Like, what? Like, everybody knew how, by saying that, the disruption would cause the kind of scene that would undermine the effort. And you see it in L.A. You can go cat and mouse, who's punching who, or chicken and egg. But maybe the protesters in L.A. weren't really terribly out of hand and didn't need to have the National Guard pulled in or the Marines. That was just for show, and that could have been insightful in and of itself. What do you think?
Provocative nature of protest sometimes brings the same attitude out of it from the people that have a right to make sure that the protests are peaceful. When you call people out before it ever begins and say there's going to be problems, other things happen. And I want to ask you about this in just a second, and about we had a death and a serious bodily injury during the protest, and you were there. But before I get to it, it is the idea that if you are going to protest and you're going to call it a peaceful protest, then you can't react. It really is turn the other cheek time. Gandhi said that one of his bases of his peaceful protest was Jesus and the peaceful way in which he stood up and took martyrdom because of what his movement was at that time. And I think that we've got to be careful when we want violence to occur, so then we can use it for our own purposes, whether it is the Weathermen in the 1960s and other violent groups like that, or others who gave an excuse to the people that were oppressing them to say, see, that's who they really are. But what happened that you saw?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you a couple things to lead to that. One thing I got to put in here is one of my era in college, I did a couple sit-ins. I didn't do anything crazy or anything. By the time I was there, it was my brothers had convinced me not to go to Vietnam already anyway, because they'd been there, 2 out of my 4. So I didn't feel good protesting so hard because my brothers, I loved them. I didn't want to be on both sides of that fence. But I did the passive stuff. Later on, though, there was a protest that was rather large. It began at Washington Square and marched up State Street is when we entered, I think, the Iraq War the second time. And, don't go to Iraq, whatever. And I went into Washington Square and I look around and I see a Bingham boy. His name's Eloy Romero. I don't remember if he went to Bingham. His family's from Bingham. I think he grew up in Larkin. Eloy was a machine gunner in Vietnam, a Marine. And there he was holding his flag, real high. I think it's possible Gino Martinez was there at the same time. But, I went over, hey, Eloy, what's up? And he marched in that parade with the Marine flag up State Street, very proudly, very quiet. He never said a word. He finally went up the street and he wasn't going to take no crap from anybody. He knew how to use his weapon, whatever it was. And his weapon was his own inner strength. And, it was just really something to watch. That's one of my favorite memories of Eloy. Eloy and Gene Martinez, they were cousins of another Bingham boy. His name's John Martinez. John Martinez died on Thanksgiving Day in 1967 in Vietnam with 2 other kids from Midvale. He was 20 years old. And, they both, Eloy and Gene, went to Vietnam after their cousin had been killed over there. And, kind of vengeful way in Eloy's mind. But, these guys earned their way. And I watched that. You asked about the No Kings. I was very, very alert. I thought I was purposefully looking for veterans. And I saw a lot. There were a lot. They're, wearing a vet hat or a shirt or something, or I fought for this right. Thank you for protesting because this is what I went to war for, and that kind of stuff. Man, it was really, really cool. Because I know that as you looked at the people at No Kings, at least in Salt Lake City, there were 2 of them. There was one earlier that afternoon.
Right.
Morning was like a University of Utah, at about 7,000 people is what they said. You look at a photo of that, and then you look at a photo of what happened in Salt Lake. There's no way there was only 3,000 more people downtown. But that crowd was comprised of nationalists, this, and every piece of our society was there. Every race, color, ethnicity, and religion, every military stripe, every non-military stripe, etc. I got there to Pioneer Park a little bit before 6, before it started, and just took a look around. Now, I don't know what motivates people to go. I go just to be a number. I'm not a shouter. I don't speak. I don't carry a flag. I don't anything like that. I just add to the number. And I've done that always with them. And say hi to people. I sure saw a lot of people I knew, and a lot of people that recognized me even, and that was kind of different too, because you just never know. But right away, I'm going to be honest, right away when I walked into the park, I did feel uneasy. And so I don't know why, and if it's what it was, I didn't have a sense of foreboding or anything like that, but it was a different something. Partially because there were a lot of people that were wearing masks. And I'm not talking about a COVID mask. They had these masks that looked like, covered almost the whole face and draped down, wearing black and hats way down on their head, or dark glasses and stuff. I go, holy crap, who are these people? There was men and women, tall, short, every in between, and then there were other kind of, behaviors that were just kind of weird. Backpacks. I thought, holy crap! I mean, they don't let this through an airport. What's in these backpacks? These were my cognitive thoughts at the time. And somebody could pull a pin, somebody could pull a gun, somebody could do anything. Well, I left, so I stayed at Pioneer Park not very long, maybe 15 minutes, 10 to 15, and I just went back to near the Gallivan Center where Open Streets was going on, and Mayor Mendenhall's Open Streets. City Weekly had a beer garden there, and I thought that was that. My son, comes by a little later, says, hey, what's going on 4th South? And I go, I don't know. So we looked over there, and here comes, I didn't know they were marching from Pioneer Park. I thought it was just going to end there. So we walked to State Street, and we saw the very beginning of the march, about 7:21. I took a picture, and here comes just a horde of people from one side of State Street to the other side of State Street, coming from 4th South upstate, and snapped a photo so I know what time it was. And just from there, that vantage point in a corner, about halfway down 350 South or so, and waving at people, saying hi again, and just saw the entire parade bunch go by. And I pointed out to, Pete and other people, and go, God, see these guys? I just don't get it. What's going on, And I was purposely looking for stuff at that point. And there, somebody would go by laughing. Somebody would solemnly go up with a mask on and draped in black and stuff. And I was looking for at the same time for those veteran hats I always like to find. And I saw the hat. I believe it's the same hat as the fellow, Mr. Hernandez, that wearing a San Francisco Giants hat. Because I remember thinking, whose logo was that? Because I didn't recognize it right away until I saw it later on TV. Might have been him. Might have been someone else. But I was trying to pay attention. And it was about 30 minutes later, when I got a text from somebody I just shook hands with and had just walked up the street 2 or 3 or 4 minutes before. And they got up there and they said, are you okay? Are you okay? On a text, there's shots being fired. So in real time, they were there. People I just said hi to, and they were scrambling. That's when I realized there was some mayhem going on up there. Didn't really know what or why. And we all found out later what happened. And I think we're still trying to discover what happened. Was it accidental? I'm sure it was. But why and how did that happen is going to be mysterious for a while. But it's emblematic of, what we're about now. There were tens of thousands of people there, more than 10,000. I just dispute that that's the number. You can look body to body, shoulder to shoulder for 4 city blocks in the Salt Lake. That's not 10,000 people. And, there were at least 3 guns pulled, one by the fellow that apparently had the rifle, and then by 2 peacekeepers. There's 3. I kind of don't think those were the only 3 guns there.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. Who designated those people as peacekeepers? I mean, I'm still waiting to find out whether that was a jurisdictional designation by somebody in the city council or the mayor, or they just designated themselves. Because that really is one of the problems we have in this country, that every knucklehead that has a gun, and so we're clear here, not everybody that owns a gun is a knucklehead. I don't believe that. I do believe in the Second Amendment rights. It's part of our Constitution. But every knucklehead that has a gun can't be designated a peacekeeper because they put on a particular uniform and show up. That's the police's job, and in a protest this large, the police presence has to be there. And so now we've got a dead bystander. We've got somebody else that is wounded, and maybe, I don't know. I know enough about doing murder cases that they talk about this being a depraved murder killing. I think that will be an interesting charge if the DA's office decides to do it that way, because that's the type of case that is taught in law school, shooting a gun into a large crowd. But the other part is, who was this guy? I don't know. And those are the type of things that we still have to learn before we make ultimate judgments about guilt or innocence. But we can make a fairly sane judgment about what happens in a city where there's going to be protests. And that is, the only people that get to pull guns as a general proposition, I understand there may be some gray areas there, everything in the law, should be the cops, should be the police. And if somehow these people had some claim to legitimacy, I got a real problem with that and anybody that endorsed them to do it, because that's where problems really start.
Well, yeah, I don't know. The peacekeeper is such a crazy misnomer. It's biblical. There's a Bible verse about the peacekeepers. So I guess it's intentional to call it that, right? And but here's the irony. There are weapons called peacekeepers.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I mean, it goes back to Western days when I think one of the Colt 45s was called a peacekeeper or something like that.
Well, this is the thing I mentioned. I got the text, and then I called immediately. I called the person, and some people who are listening to this might know what I'm talking about. There were probably 4 groups of people that walked by, couples that had been on the City Weekly does a Greece trip every year, and we go in September. Well, this was a couple that had been 2 years ago, just happened to randomly walk up the street, and so I was concerned. And she said, "Yeah, well, we were standing there and heard the shots, and my friend was really close and saw somebody with a yellow vest shooting." And I thought, well, I saw people back at the park with yellow vests on, and they weren't cops,
no,
right? But it may have been part of that unease that I had back at the park. I don't know. But they were behaving differently, external of the crowd itself, maybe turning their head more than other people, observing, or I don't know. But they weren't part of our official police of Salt Lake City. Our Salt Lake City cops did not fully decide. These people were apparently hired by the group sponsors of the protest. And I'm not saying that's unusual, but they weren't city cops.
Well, I think it is unusual in this sense, if they were hired by the people that planned the protest march. Again, and I did this enough times that you would have marshals that would marshal the parade, and they would be designated with a bandolero or something, or have a sign. So if people had a problem with where they were going, or had a question about the length of the protest or whatever, they would be the one to answer the questions. I never participated in one that I had anything to do with that we armed those people. Once again, that's the idea of a peaceful protest, is that the police presence is going to be there and we don't bring our guns. I mean, that's my opinion, and I think Gandhi would agree with me on that one.
Well, if you're the legal expert here, if it's not the police, who I believe have some sort of shield around them in cases like this, if there's a shooting, this would be a civil matter. Is that incorrect?
No, I think there could be a civil complaint that would be filed. That's for another time to talk about what they did, the facts show. And I'm sure the DA's office is doing their investigation now. So it could be a civil matter, but it also could be a criminal matter. Self-defense, defense of a third person, defense of a house are statutory defenses that have been on our criminal code going back to the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. We've always had those. Those are common law defenses. But there are restrictions on how that can be used as a defense. And I sit flummoxed about any idea that marshals, my term, at a protest like this brought weaponry to a peaceful protest. Again, my judgment, that's for the police to do. That's their
Well, that has always been one of the main arguments against, handling guns, is that it can go wrong. Humorously, it's not in this context, but many years ago, there was a guy, I think his name was Brezhnehan. He was a representative, I believe, in the House from West Jordan. He kind of famously went after a trespasser or something out in West Jordan, shot himself in the foot or something like that. And it brought to light the case of, you really shouldn't be doing this. Deputizing yourself and just go shooting around, like, it's just not right. Protect yourself, but don't go attacking.
No, we're in that's an area that we could have a long discussion about, and I could talk forever because I did so many self-defense cases, murders and otherwise. But let me ask you something, John, and that is, I'd like to ask you about the idea that we now are moving into an area where we've seen some actual violence against people that are elected officials, and we've seen some responses about that. The Donald Trump's parade and the marches around the country, the No Kings marches, have shown a disparate view of what our country is about. And we both talked a little bit about protests and our attitude about it. But there is somebody, I believe, that needs to be called out, other than Trump himself. If I can just throw this into the discussion just briefly. I think it's hilarious that when asked about the No Kings protest, he used this phrase, "We don't want to be a king." And so he used the second person plural, which is also the royal we, to indicate that he didn't want to be royalty. And again, that's something this country has always objected to. And those protests object to that, not just Donald Trump, but to that attitude from anybody. But when we look at it, and we looked at, there's a human being somewhere in a morgue or a place that they're going to be buried, funeral home. Mike Lee responded to that, John, and you were the one that called me and pointed it out to me. So why don't you tell the people here that old Mike Lee, our senior senator from Utah, who once read a book, I'm convinced of it, but not for a long time. What did he say about what happened here in Utah?
Well, when these things happen anymore, I think that there's the gut reaction to point fingers right away. So immediately, there were texts and tweets and all kinds of stuff. Oh, this guy must be a deranged left-wing Democrat or something, clearly, and he shot one of his own. This wasn't MAGA or whatever. And the other people would point the other way. And that was the early senses of wait until all the facts are out before you post something. But Mike Lee waited a little bit. And he then posted, two obnoxiously bad posts. One was saying that, this is what you get in one Marxist rule, implying that, all of us are bad people except him. We're all Marxists somehow. And then the other one about Nightmare on Walt Street instead of Elm Street. And they were just egregiously in poor taste. And they were egregiously wrong. Okay, backing it up, Mike Lee is seldom right. But this was off the charts. As you just said, people died. 2 people. Respectfully of all else, these were 2 people who were in politics, very high profile in their state, who no longer, along with other politicians, clearly, because the guy had a 70-person hit list on him, can feel safe in our country. And Mike Lee responded in that way. Well, shit hit the fan, didn't it? And Mike Lee has since, not just embarrassed Mike Lee's name, which he's fond of, apparently. He has no compunction to feel anything but, some kind of self-valuement and by destroying his own name. But must he destroy the name and reputation of every Utahn by doing so? Because that's what's happening all over the internet, is the country took it out on Utah. Utah and the country took it out on the LDS Church. Countrywide, it's being taken out on Republicans who voted for Lee. This guy made a comment and statement that's so out of round that, the entirety of civil, fair people are against this man overnight, and deservedly.
But it's not only out of round, just quickly, it's not out of character. I mean, this is
it's not out of
who
character.
This guy has become. I knew Mike when he was an assistant U.S. attorney, and I knew him briefly when he was a law clerk for my dear friend Dee Benson, rest his soul. And it isn't out of character. He's our senior senator. And so people are going to take it out on Utah. And you know what? I think they should. Nightmare on Wall Street, to disparage the guy that ran for vice president in the ticket against Donald Trump the second time. So he thinks that's funny, or whatever he thinks. I think it's moronic. It's as bad as Donald Trump playing it's worse than Donald Trump playing the song Fortunate Son at his
I
tank
don't think
fest.
he knew that. I don't think he caught the irony of that one.
Well, Mike Lee doesn't catch the irony of anything. Mike Lee doesn't
I'm
anymore.
saying Trump didn't catch the
No,
irony.
I get that.
Lee was intentional.
I know, I get that. Mike Lee doesn't catch irony or nuance or anything. And he not only disparaged his name, but he disparaged the name of his father, a good man, former dean at the BYU Law School, and a well-known legal scholar, and his brother, a former Supreme Court of Utah judge. This is a guy that, to get attention, does stuff like that and doesn't have guts enough to leave it out so people can say what he has. He hasn't apologized for it. He just deleted it.
No, he deleted it, and it was only after you brought it to my attention. It was I knew the other senator from Minnesota had confronted him yesterday. He was stone silent. But you said Amy Klobuchar today.
Yeah, well, no, she went after him a couple days ago too, and in no uncertain terms, and apparently met him face to face and talk to him about it. Which, again, here's something else, if I may rant just a little bit. That's the difference. The difference is she got an opportunity to talk to him face to face. None of the rest of us ever do. He and Trump hide in their tweet toilets and send out all of this stuff, and nobody ever gets to face him down because he's never there at a town hall where any of us that aren't on his team get to talk to him. It's a gutless attitude that is displayed. And don't get me wrong, Democrats have done the same thing. We have something to talk about with them soon. But for him to say that shows such a disrespect for the tragedy that occurred. It's
right. He doesn't know the boundaries of both self-awareness and shame. They're both like they're on one shoulder. He doesn't have an angel and a devil on his shoulders. He's got a devil on each side. And so, he did this. I called Schumer's office and I called Dick Durbin's office and said, hey, do something about this guy. And don't send a text and don't send a letter. Get up and censure this man immediately. On Durbin's case, at least I got to talk to a real person. In Schumer's case, it was just to leave a message. But yeah, he's now deleted it. But we're still stuck with the guy. And like you said a minute ago, where's Cox on this?
Oh,
where's anybody else of high standard on this? Where's Curtis?
They're AWOL. That's where they always are.
Where's John Huntsman, who placed this guy into favor? Yeah. He's Mr. Short Sell Lee, and they're all silent.
No.
Like, oh well, it's okay. We're just it's our sandbox. No, this is shameful.
No, they're AWOL, and they're always going to be on stuff like this because they're afraid of the man at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue calling them out for it. It's time for courage. It's time for the Republican Party in Utah to take Mike Lee to the woodshed. It's time for us Democrats are AWOL. We don't hear from Kamala. We don't hear from Barack. We don't hear from Clinton, the supposed leaders of our party. They're afraid too. This is something that everybody that is a politician, is anybody that served in the Senate or worked with people in the Senate that knows people in the Senate should be out front screaming about Lee and this stuff and the others that do it. It shouldn't be one or two senators from Minnesota that are doing it. But we don't have the guts to do it because with them, and I'm afraid also with the Democratic Party, it's only about not offending their own base and saying things for their own base. And what they're missing is that undermines our attitude about what we really believe in as a country, what those old tanks that were running down Pennsylvania Avenue stood for. And that is standing up for freedom of speech, not banning books, and speaking out against power. The people that have power are even afraid to speak out against it. And people like Kamala Harris and others have the power. She was a United States Senator to stand up and deal with it. But they don't. They're hiding.
Well, this is part of the strength of the MAGA party right now is they have a fighter, what they interpret to see as a fighter, as their leader. So, and if the Democrats don't have an equivalent, yeah, you're going to be stuck with this stuff. Back in the olden days, and I'm talking about like older days, I wrote about this a while back, how the Greeks would shame people that were like Mike Lee. And I did take a little liberty with it. I don't know if you know what the Zanes are, a little bit. I told you, but the Zanes were they wore 16 statues before the Olympic Stadium, the entry to the old Olympic Stadium, Olympia, Greece. And on those statues, on those pedestals, were 16 people who were the most shameful of those athletes. And back then, the Olympics wasn't just sports. There was poetry and philosophy and all kinds of literature kind of stuff, theater. So anybody who was like unsportsmanlike, in this case like Lee, or behaved badly or falsified things or briberies, they would build a statue to them. From the fines imposed, that's the money taken from those fines would build a statue. And then those people would live in infamy forever on those pedestals. That's why in Greece there's nobody with the first name Evpolos today. Because Evpolos was a man, one of the statues there, and it was so shameful. He didn't shame just himself, he shamed his whole region of Thessaly. And under this guideline, if we build a giant statue to Mike Lee, there'd be nobody named Mike ever again. And with apologies to my son Mike, but they took it seriously. If you were a bad person, you didn't get to be exalted. You didn't get to be in the Senate and act like that. You didn't get to be heroic. And we somehow let that be. Well, let me just read something, Ron, because even though we don't have a statue to Mike Lee, what does live in infamy today is the internet, at least currently, until some new technology comes along. So what you do say, it's trapped there forever. So although he's pulled his posts down, his posts live on because other people captured them and they can share them forever. Here's what I would never want to be said about me. And this was posted about Mike Lee online yesterday by a guy named Texas Paul. He's a Texan. He's got almost 200,000 followers on Threads, which is, puts him up in damn near the league of a Mike Lee, who's got the power of the Senate and a big public face to have a lot. He's got 400,000 or something. Here's what he said. He wrote, let me be clear about Mike Lee. I would never hurt Mike Lee. I just don't give a shit about him to do that. But if Mike Lee was collapsed on the sidewalk and needed CPR, I would step over his body and go buy a snow cone. If Mike Lee was on fire, I wouldn't waste my urine on him. So great. That's what I think about Mike Lee. Now that's the equivalent on the internet to a Zane statue outside of Olympic Stadium. That lives on. Every generation of Lee from here on forward is going to look about that and be read about their uncle or father or grandfather or cousin. You don't see that about the Yengich family. Well, you'd be shamed if it ever was.
No, I mean, the truth of the matter is that how have we gotten here where, it isn't that long ago that would have got him censored by the Senate, and also it would have been a ticket out of office the next election. We don't do it anymore. We've talked a little bit about this. I've made more mistakes than I would like to count. As a believer, I fear to a great degree meeting my maker, because I've done things that I'm not proud of and tried to atone for them. This is the type of stuff done by a man who has the power for good. He does. He holds himself out as a believer, Christianity, and I truly wonder how he gets there. Now again, it could have been in a moment of frustration or wanting to show that he's a really smart guy, or for his team, for his base, or to get Donald Trump to look at him with a smile. Okay, I accept people make stupid mistakes like that.
I'm going to tell you, he made no mistake. He did it unintentionally.
Let me finish, because I wasn't done. I was just going to say that. He did this intentionally. And instead of standing up for it and apologizing, actually coming out and fucking apologizing, he just took it off the interwebs as though that is punishment enough. I don't want to hear about people like Mike Lee talking about how high and mighty they are and how religious they are or anything else like that until they're willing to make a public act of contrition and indicate that they're sorry for that. And then, like Klobuchar did to him, go to Walls and go to the family of those two dead politicians and say, I really am sorry. That was stupid. If he did that, it's okay. We don't need to build a statute to him. They don't do that anymore. And the fact of the matter is, that's the problem with this country. One of them is that you do something stupid, you do it intentionally stupid, you do it recklessly stupid or negligently stupid, then it's on you. You may remember, John, when I was writing for the City Weekly, I threatened to beat up a prosecutor after a court case. And it was captured by the Salt Lake Tribune.
Okay.
Remember?
Yes.
And my dad chewed my fanny out over the phone, talking about hurting the family name. And a man I really admired, federal district judge at that time, Dave Winder, called me. He goes, what's wrong with you? I got it from a lot of people. I wrote a column apologizing to my family and the bar and the guy that I wanted to beat up and everybody else. It was written in print. I did it. Doesn't make me a good guy. It was, look, I hurt my family name.
Family. You're hurt. Yeah.
This isn't on script, but can I tell you a story about that from my dad? Because we're honoring fathers this week.
I think we need to talk about fathers.
So my dad, I think I was 9 and my brother would have been 13. And my dad, I've told this story to a lot of people, and it is 100% true because I remember it. Called me and Nick, my brother Nick, into the room, and he goes, sit down, I want to talk to you. He had that tone in his voice going, oh, God. I started running through what I'd done wrong that week. He said, do you know what bail is? He looked at me and looked at my brother. Do you know what bail is? And I knew not to talk. My brother said, bail is if you get arrested, they take you to jail, and if you have the money, you can put the money up and they'll release you from jail. And my dad says, yeah. And he looked at me. He said, do you understand what that is? I go, yeah. Tell me. Well, if you get arrested and go to jail, then you can bail us out and we won't have to stay in jail. And he goes, you both understand it, because here's what I want to tell you. If you go to jail, you get arrested and go to jail, you tell them to make the bail as high as it possibly can be. Again, I'm not talking. My brother, my dad's favorite, he was named after him, says, but Pa, wouldn't that mean that you would have to stay in jail because it was a lot more? He goes, exactly, because here's the deal. If you get arrested and ruin the name that I have worked for, your uncles have worked for, your grandfathers worked for, all of us work for, I'll bail you out and then I'll kill you. I will kill you. So do we understand that? And he wasn't kidding. It was serious.
Your dad, I know he wasn't kidding.
It's serious. He was serious about it. Don't ruin my name. So when I wrote that column for the Private Eye, I had that in my head because your name is important. And when you're a public figure and a senator, it's important. And Mike Lee doesn't get it because he's a narcissist.
No, you're right. Let's get off of him. You know, he pretends that he can be the good guy on his other, he's got an other handle out there. It's called the Senator Mike, his official account. And he tweets rarely on it, frankly. I think it was Brian Shaw, the reporter, who did 3,000 tweets in a couple of months. This guy must be on it all day long, every day. That's what we pay him for. But the Senator Lee account acts like it's composed and so on. But the based Mike Lee account, where this comes from, that's his true alter ego. That's his real self. That's his insightful self. He's a mean, evil person. But your father wasn't. What surprised me about it, think of this. If people don't understand how different Ron and I grew up, just think about this. Is there anybody out there whose father set them down at the age of 13 and 9, and instead of saying, hey, would you like a baseball mitt for Christmas, said, you fuck up my name, you're dead. That happened in Bingham Canyon.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what? You knew that, and I knew that from my grandfather. My dad didn't that so much, but your dad was a great man, and I miss the fathers of Bingham Canyon, frankly. Those were real men.
Yeah, no, I mean, my dad was a much better man than I'll ever be, but he also played catch with me. That's how I learned to play baseball. But when it came to stuff like that, there was no fooling around. And ultimately in my life, I did get arrested, and I didn't call him. I was afraid, and I'm not kidding. I was not about to call him. We can tell that story another time, but my dad was serious. I mean, I don't know.
To a 9-year-old.
To a 9. And you go, I'm still deciding whether I want to be a fireman or an astronaut. Come on, man. But
Well, there
they
you
were
go.
good men, though. They were good men, and we want to honor the fathers of Bingham Canyon and the fathers that they spawned, and you, Johnny, and all of that, because in truth, if we can be like them, we've achieved something.
My singular, just a quick one. My dad, one time, we used to sell rocks in front of the House of Copper. The kids did. That's how we made supposedly our living. I was 6 years old or 5 or 7, don't know. And down came some guys from Bingham in front of there, and it was the first time I was mugged. And I don't want to say the guy's name. I don't know him by name. I know what his nickname was, and I'm not going to reveal it because maybe he turned out to be the best guy in the world. But at the time, he was terrorizing Bingham, little, kid, and older than me by 4, 5, or 6 years. And he took my rocks. And, which was bad enough, but I had taken the rocks from my dad. A lot of these guys brought stuff out of the hill, and, everybody had a little piece of iron pyrite or copper or something.
I had a whole
My dad notices they're gone. I went whining to my dad, saying, "Hey, this guy took all my rocks." And my dad looks at the shelf, and there's no rocks. He goes, "Where's my rocks?" And I go, "This guy's got them. Go get the sons of bitches." And I had to walk up the road from lead mine and catch up to those guys. It's a scary walk anyway.
Right.
And I was just a little kid. And I got him back. And only because that guy just decided to, who knows why, he gave me the rocks back. They weren't. And I gave them back to my dad. But that was my lesson, similar to yours. Like, you got yourself in this shit, go get out of it. I was a child.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean,
happy Father's Day to Nick Yengich. Happy Father's Day to Pete Saltas and all the rest of the Bingham fathers.
Amen.
You have a friend wrote a nice little piece for us, and I know it's going to be in City Weekly today.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to print tomorrow. We ran it. Go ahead and tell us about it.
Yeah, so good friend of mine, Alex Ramos, he's from L.A. Interesting story. A great young lawyer. He's a terrific criminal defense attorney, and he's an artist, and as is his wife, and he's got 2 little kids, and his son's name is Knox, Knox, and he wrote just a touching piece for the City Weekly, and it's about fatherhood. And I'm not going to in any way destroy it. I hope you all will find it on the City Weekly website and or get the paper here in Salt Lake City and around the state, because it's a terrific story about one of my big loves, and that's baseball and playing catch with your son. And I just want to commend it to you because it's very touching. And I think we're going to post a picture of Alex and his son on Sunday. I'm a part owner, original one actually, of the Ogden Raptors, which means that I don't make any money, but I get to go to the ball games free up in the Pioneer.
Oh, hi, did Dave Baggett.
Yeah, and shout out to Dave and to my godson, Evan Parker, who is the manager of the Raptors now. It's great baseball. It's fun to go to, and you're going to see people that are great baseball players that didn't get a chance with organized baseball, and many of them will. But anyway, Alex and Knox for Father's Day dressed with the team, worked out with them. Knox was the bat boy, and Alex got to sit on the bench and experience what it's like to be on a baseball team with really good baseball being played and see what it was like. But we're going to put that picture up. That was done by the photo taken by Kevin Johnson.
You mentioned baseball earlier. I know how much it means to you. My family ties to baseball. Any boy relates to that story. It's a great story. Any father will relate to that story. It's one of the first pieces I'd ever seen anybody submit on their first submission that I really, really liked from the opening sentence onward. Yeah. Commend your friend. I hope to meet him soon. But yes, it's running.
It's running, and while we're at it, and we're getting close to the end here. This is for me, and it's a shout out to the City Weekly, who supports us with this podcast and all this good stuff that John and Pete and the people that work at the City Weekly do. It really is the independent paper in the state of Utah. It gets around the state, and it is the voice that allows people to hear a different perspective, and always has. And John is also the father, grandfather, Dutch uncle, Greek uncle, and everything else about that paper, and remains so. Pete does a great job now, but, support the the people that are advertised in the City Weekly, and because they are the ones that allow that paper to continue to run, and it has for all these years. And it's not easy to do, particularly in the economic circumstances that we have now. So pick it up and support the people that support John and also the Bingham Boys podcast by as my mother used to say, trading at their places. Go in and trade them, trade them some money, and enjoy their hospitality as well. One final note on that: we got a really nice response from a guy that worked with John on the track gang up at Kennecott, and who mentioned the Sorterios. John, you talk about it, but if you know of other businesses owned by Bingham people, for example, Joe Varanakis's and his son runs it now, Presto Print, shout out to those guys. Patronize them if you can. And John, talk a little bit about Mr. Evans.
Well, the note came from Mike Evans, who's a really, really good guy. His dad was a foreman, worked for my dad, or maybe together up at truck haulage. We know what that is, but anyway, it was a section of the mine. And the Evans guys were good people. Mike is a great guy. Everybody trusted and liked Mike. His younger brother, Dave, and I worked on the track gang together for Nate Ish. We were on that gang. And Dave, their last name was Peterlich, their mother's side. So he's half Croatian. I'm pretty sure it's Peterlich. Half Croatian and Evans, and Catholic kids and stuff. Well, Dave later on married Donna Evans, and I didn't know this at the time, but we ran a story in City Weekly that was really, one of the stories we did that really had an impact. And about 2 or 3 weeks before the mayoral election in West Jordan one year, the leading candidate to win that, or looked like it was going to be Kelly Atkinson was the state legislator, going to be mayor over there or something, leading by a long ways. We ran a story, that revealed that there were certain proclivities in the Atkinson household with young boys and sexual stuff, and it was reported on, and we did the story, and no one else would. Well, with about 2 or 3 weeks to go, he's got like a 40-point lead. 2 weeks later, he loses by like 40 points, and Donna becomes mayor. And it was only after that I found out it was Dave's wife that became mayor. That's my Evans story. But, the Evans family up there was Mike and Dave. They grew up in Midvale, grew up with your law partner, Earl Zeiss. And the reason that he wrote was because his pharmacist, I don't know, is Soterio?
No, he also goes to Dr. Mike Soterio now.
Okay,
as his skin doctor. Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. If you're ever in the other place, cafe, restaurant, that's where Mike will sometimes stop for breakfast or lunch these days. So there you go. See you next time.
Yep. Thank you. God bless everybody, and be safe.
Yeah, we should probably dedicate ourselves to talk about nothing that happened up to this point. Only talk about things that happen next week, because they're going to be a shit pile for sure.
Well, I'm sure we will. So we'll have something to talk about. And again, let us know if there's something you would like us to talk about. And also, if you have comments on what we say, and if you disagree with us, fine. Try to do so respectfully. And everybody, as I say, be safe. It's a difficult world that we live in, but hope always
springs eternal.
It does. It springs eternal, and that's the truth.
Okay, I'm going to start chiseling a Zane statue for Mike Lee. I got to go.
We'll see you, John.
All right, take care.